Hi, Anthony, and thanks for taking the time to chat with us about Sky and how you adopted FlowFuse. And yeah, let's first start a bit by the context, like who are you with relation to FlowFuse and then Sky, and how is Sky using FlowFuse?
Okay, well, hi ZJ. Happy to be here. And yeah, so I'm a senior developer at Sky. I've been there for nearly 7 years. And a lot of what we do in the area that I work in um, is that there's a lot of kind of data transformation, data manipulation, moving data from point A to point B, ingesting data from multiple sources and moving kind of stuff around for various consumers. And so we just one of my boss had used Node-RED in the past and felt it was a good fit, so he kind of tasked me with the with the with that, investigating Node-RED a bit further, FlowFuse, and on the back of that, we've got a few apps, a few flows that we're now running in production that
Cool.
yeah, that are doing things for us that have been very quick to kind of develop and get out there. So.
And so the initial use case was you have an unspecified number of data sources, which you have to wire and to another sink of the data. And right now you don't really like you cannot plan ahead and understand how you need to wire these sources and sinks together.
It's not quite like that. I think it's more that we've traditionally we've always written kind of full apps, if you will, using TypeScript, which will consume from maybe a pub sub queue or something else, or in some cases even like an FTP server. And it would then, we'd take some data, we'd do some transformation on it, we'd put it onto another queue, it might go to another place, and so on and so forth. So you would have this kind of each kind of component would be an app in of itself that would have its own, that would be either in a repo of its own, or it might be in a mono repo, and so you'd have this whole kind of process, lots of boilerplate code, putting everything together just to kind of get something up and running. And then, and whilst we do our very best to kind of keep things in terms of like patterns, we try and standardize where we can. It's very difficult because not every use case is exactly the same. So you do get kind of a lot of disparate kind of things being deployed. And I think that we've been slowly moving towards a more event-based way of working. And the kind of the FlowFuse, the Node-RED kind of way of passing events was just seemed like this could be a really good fit for what it is we're trying to achieve.
And so your boss discovered Node-RED probably in his home assistant setup to automate his home, and then asked you, Anthony, can you please investigate how we're going to roll this out at Sky?
Yeah, that kind of thing. He'd done some stuff. He kind of showed me a flow that he'd kind of put together, and I went, okay, yeah, I see what this is. And well, I said I see what this is. It was more of a case of going, I think I know what this is, but we'll just have to play with it and break it and see what happens, really. But yeah, and it was there were a lot of challenges with doing that. We have we have several kind of environments that we deploy our applications into. Three of which are non-production, and then there are two separate two separate account clusters in their Kubernetes clusters. And then we have two separate Kubernetes clusters for prod. So we have like a prod A, prod B for, for resilience purposes. And
which are geography-wise distributed.
Yeah. So they're in different availability zones.
Yeah.
As well. And the main challenge. I mean, I remember when we were looking at FlowFuse, when I started looking at FlowFuse, being, impressed with things like, I really like the DevOps pipeline, that whole kind of, you can create an environment and attach an instance to it, and you can promote an app through that. But I soon realized that wasn't going to work in our use case, because our non-prod environments, they can all talk to all of those. They can talk to each other. The two prod environments, they can talk to each other as well. However, non-prod and prod cannot talk to each other. There's a great big firewall in between the two of them for security reasons. So it kind of like, right, okay, so how are we going to do this? And I had no idea, literally no idea. I was kind of like, okay, this is going to be and what kind of came next was a bit of a lot of reading, a lot of trial and error, a lot of sifting through the FlowFuse source code.
Yeah.
But we eventually came up with a process that it's still going to be refined. It's not like we've created the process and this is it. It's very much an iterative thing.
But just to recap a bit, you have a sort of staging or development environment, then a QA, and then you have prod A and prod B.
Yeah.
And these are four separate, physically separated clusters, which...
So we've got FlowFuse deployed on 3 clusters, one which is non-prod, and then the other two which are the prod clusters. And there's no communication between the non-prod and prod at all.
And prod can talk to each other just because there's some state to send the other way. If you want to fail over from one zone to another. But in principle, there's one doing actively like the work, and the other one is sitting idly by, waiting until you tell them you're queued up. Let's go.
We in one case we're actually running in a kind of active because they're both consuming from the same pub sub, and the way the pub sub is set up because we're using GCP. In that instance, when a message is pulled off the subscription, the other worker won't see it. So that there is a risk of duplication in a rare, but if we get the odd duplicate, then we can handle it. It's not not really a problem.
Got it. Okay, and so then FlowFuse is being used for the orchestration and the user management, but the DevOps pipeline idea, there's where you have your own tool set built up, which allows you to go across Kubernetes clusters.
That's correct. Yeah. So here's a slide I created specifically for this.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So do let me know if you can see that.
It does. Yeah.
Excellent. So what we have here is, so over here we have our non-prod environment. There's FlowFuse running, which has got one-to-many Node-RED applications and instances running on it. And over here we've got the prod environment, so on and so forth. Excuse me. So the way we've approached this is we use the FlowFuse API to obtain a snapshot of. So I've worked on an application. Once I'm happy for it to be deployed, we create a release candidate snapshot, if you will.
Yeah.
Which we then push up to GitHub. GitHub then that pushes up to that's then picked up by our CI, Circle CI in this case. And what that does is it will bundle up the snapshot, and it will then send that to the Octopus deploy server, and it will create a release for that particular snapshot. Then once we're happy with it, once we've got it in Octopus deploy, we then and this is all powered by Bash script at this point
Yeah.
in Octopus deploy. So that will then push the snapshot again via the API, and that will push it back into our non-prod environment, just to validate that the deployment process is working and happy. Oh, excuse me. And if we're happy that everything is working over here, we'll then do a deployment over into our production clusters. So that'll be prod A and prod B. I've only put the first one on there just for kind of brevity at this point. It does mean though that we have to make a couple of changes to the way the snapshot is generated, because Octopus Deploy works off of one of the handy things about Octopus Deploy is that it works with it does like a templating thing very easily. Now, there are probably people who are out there who say, yeah, well, I can do that kind of thing using sed and everything like that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's cool, but I'm not that much of a masochist at times. So we do a bit of work. So once we pull out the snapshot, and it will look a little bit like this. So apologies if this is small text, and because there's nothing says what a great presentation than code on a screen, right? But if you look up here, we've got owner ID, and we've got this octopus.action create that's an Octopus specific thing there. And then we've got in the environment, we've got these Octopus variables that are in here. And what that means is that we can have different variables for different environments. So we don't have to kind of make a load of changes to the snapshot for this is for prod, this is for prod B, this is for stage. It just means all we have to do is just put the variables in there, and then Octopus just substitutes it and then pushes it up there. So as far as the FlowFuse API sees, is it will just see exactly those things. And then one of the other things we wanted when we did this process is we wanted to make sure we had immutable deployments, so we're not kind of overwriting our deployments. So we came up with this kind of release process, if you will. So step one was we would create a Node-RED application, just in case one didn't exist. We then create a Node-RED instance. We then publish the Node-RED snapshot. All of this, by the way, is done using the FlowFuse API. And again, it's all done in Octopus using a load of Bash scripts. We deploy the snapshot. Once that's been deployed, we just check that the Node-RED instance, the health of the instance. So we kind of create a status endpoint, which is just a little thing that kind of mimics the same thing that Spring, that kind of Spring Boot does with we're just checking is the other downstream dependencies up and what have you. If that's all fine, we update the ingress rules. And this step here, that the reason we have this update ingress rules is because, and this goes back to what I was saying about the FlowFuse, looking through the source code and what have you, because I didn't realize at the time. I was thinking, well, why can't I just pick the cluster? Wouldn't it be great if the DevOps pipeline could just go put that on that cluster there and put that on that cluster, and then save all of a lot of this hassle? But then I kind of started looking at the code and realized that you've engineered it in such a way, which is in many respects the right way. It's all done through plugins. So FlowFuse doesn't know about Kubernetes, it doesn't know about Docker or what have you. It just has a driver that conforms to the interface for create an instance, deploy, do this, and so. But what I did realize is the Kubernetes driver, if you suspended an instance, and then you restarted it, it would, anything that I'd done as part of the deployment process to kind of update an ingress rule. And the whole point of the ingress rule being updated is so that, because we have everything behind like a traffic manager GTM thing, and we want to make sure that we don't have to make changes there, because changes in that in the kind of Akamai is a lot more
involved.
Yeah, it's a bit more involved. So this just allows us to kind of keep all of the Akamai properties they just stay fixed. So we just update these ingress rules so that if And then there's actually a run book I've got in there. So if someone does suspend an instance, when they restart it through this run book in Octopus Deploy, it will actually restore the ingress rules as well. So yeah, so assuming all of sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, never mind.
So assuming all of this is happy, then what it will do is we'll then delete our previous Node-RED instance. Otherwise, if there is a failure, if something goes wrong, what it'll do is it'll clean up the failed Node-RED instance, and just so we're not left with kind of instances kind of flying around. So that is kind of the process we've come to at the moment, which allows us to get past this kind of firewall, multiple
multi-site deployment of FlowFuse. Yeah.
without raising a load of GitHub issues with you saying, why can't I just have Kubernetes in the thing, and then have a big, and then it's a big load of comments about engineering philosophies and what have you, which in a lot of ways I like, but
part of this, especially the push to GitHub or any other Git host, is definitely on the roadmap. But we'll just invalidate part of your work when we get there.
It's fine if it works really well, then I don't mind. I am not my code.
Either way, can you talk a bit about like what the actual use cases are that the end users of FlowFuse and Node-RED build with the stack?
So typically, so when you say end users, you were talking about developers, or are you talking about
people that use Node-RED that you manage and orchestrate? So what are what's the data they're consuming? Because you talked about the PubSub, but is that like news stories from news channels? Is that real life like data from sports events that needs to be added to the television feed?
So in the initial instance at the moment, it's new. Well, no, that's not strictly true. There is news, and it's articles that are being created. So the Sky editors will write an article, they'll publish it, and this is the same whether it's sports or news, and then that gets pushed into PubSub, and then the app. Then I'd recently created an app that then consumes that. Stores it in a database, calls off to a downstream service to get some other data, and then at the other end also provides an endpoint, which is an RSS feed, which another one of our downstream partners can then consume from.
Okay, so it's collecting the news stories, combining them.
So every every news story that comes in, it's coming in it comes in as like a great big blob of JSON, and obviously then at the other end I've got an RSS feed to create. So with a bit of so I ended up creating a custom node to do this, a lot of this stuff. So all I had to do was pass in all of the kind of the props that I needed for the article, and just go, here's the article, and then it just at the other end it just spat out a load of XML without me having to do too much of a because you can do the stuff with the templating, which is good, but in some respects it was, I don't know, it's one of those things where I can't decide if I was being cleverer to create a separate node, or if I should have just stuck with the template node because of the it's quite fairly straightforward. But anywho, but as well as providing, so I'd get this news article in, but aside from there wasn't enough information in this news article for the output, so I would have to make this call to one of our suppliers, pull in a load of data related to the video.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to go and get some video metadata, which I then combine the two things, which then creates the RSS feed. So in a lot of ways, it's fairly simple. It's not, it's not particularly complex, but where where I think the Node-RED side of it really helped on the FlowFuse is that I was able to create the instance like in the dev realm, for example, in the non-prod environment. Immediately once I've created an instance, that's effectively there's a server and it's up and it's running. It's a Kubernetes pod. It's sat there. It's doing its thing. I don't have to spend ages creating a new Helm chart and figuring out what the values need to be. It's just a few button clicks and there's the thing. And it's got access to all of the resources it needs in GCP as well, so we can connect it all up and so on.
So you're up and running really quickly, and through low code, you get to validate your hypothesis and build your app really quickly.
Yeah, and this has been one of the things that that we've kind of found, which is even if someone says, right, we're going to use FlowFuse, we've got this idea for an app, let's just quickly create something to prove out, like as you say, prove out a hypothesis. And in some cases it's been okay, that's cool. We've not got what we want here, so we're going to tweak it and we're going to do it in a more traditional kind of software development process, which is if that's adding value, then
that's adding value.
Then that's fine. If it's helped out answer, the whole point really is it's helping us to answer questions. It's the faster feedback loop.
Yeah.
Rather than kind of spending a day or half a day creating an app, and that's literally and all the app does is say hello world. It's not got any of the kind of the business logic. It's not really doing anything. Whereas the initial iteration of the app that I created, I had it, the first iteration, which still provided RSS, was working end to end. But whereas now in the first iteration, it was using a bucket, like an S3 bucket for storing data, and because at the time I was like, well, do I need a database, or can I just get away with an S3 bucket kind of thing? So I thought, well, I'll try and see what happens if I just do an S3 bucket, and I realized that very quickly that I could blow the Node-RED stack if I was, once the number of, for a small number of articles, it was fine in a bucket, but for a large number of objects, man, I ran out of memory very quickly. But I did discover though that Node-RED is pretty bulletproof, as in, if we were doing this in a traditional sense, then I know that the pod would have gone out of memory and it would have gone down, and then a new pod would get stood up, and then that would fall over, and you'd get into this, this crash loop thing. Whereas at least with the Node-RED runtime, what it would do is it would go, I've run out of memory, I've stopped. Okay, we'll start it up again. Oh, run out of memory again. And after about, I can't remember what the exact number is, but then it would just go, okay, right, I'm not starting this again.
Giving up. Yeah.
So next time you start this is going to be like in a safe mode. And that's been really useful because you don't lose a lot of the metrics that come out of the pod, because it's still the same pod. It's the runtime that's just kind of sitting on top of it and stopping me from blowing up the memory. Yeah. So it's been good. So in terms of, again, understanding that meant I was able to then go, oh, you know what? I'm going to use a database for this. And so created a Postgres database and did all of that kind of stuff. And that was and I think that was the really powerful thing, is the speed at which I could just make that pivot as well. Yeah. Because it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to have to spend ages now.
Yeah, you validate something and minutes later you understand what the better direction is and you can pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other interesting things, just on the subject of metrics, was that once I was able to get kind of like Prometheus metrics out of a Node-RED application, I was able to then start to do some performance testing of the app. And I could kind of see at which points things actually did start to fall over, and then I could tweak like the memory, or or the CPU, depending on whether or not it was a what kind of process it was happening. And again, speed I could do that was great.
Yeah, pretty advanced use case. If we switch a bit onto like the organizational side, you're probably not the only one that has access to FlowFuse and Node-RED. Like, how big is the team? And can you explain a bit like how do you work together in Node-RED and FlowFuse?
Yeah. Okay. So we're not a particularly big team at the moment. It's me and a couple of others who are kind of doing a lot of the work in relation to Node-RED. Sorry, what was that? As soon as I started answering, I realized the question just went.
That's right. So how big is the team? And then like how do you collaborate?
So yeah, so there's about 3. There are more of us in the team, but they tend to work more on the traditional kind of software development stuff, but they've got involved as well. And in terms of how we collaborate, the way it, excuse me, the way it tends to work at the moment is, and again, this is purely because of the speed at which things can happen. I can work on one particular application. My colleague can work on another application. Once we get to a point where, right, I need someone to like review what I've done, I can then speak to my colleague. We get together because you can't do PRs in the traditional sense. Like, I can't raise a PR in Git. If I raised a PR in GitHub at the moment, all it would do is just say, "Oh, you've just made a change to a load of you've just made a change to a big JSON blob," and it doesn't really see. So what you end up having to do is really, it's that communication piece between you and other people, so that people can go, right, tell me what you've changed here, and you go, well, and you see the flow straight away. So that makes things easier. Where it gets a little trickier is if you have a function node that has a lot going on. So that is still something that would be handy if there was a way of seeing a diff inside a function node in some capacity. But hey ho,
I'll forward it to the devs.
So, but it just means that we have to, you're kind of, what you're doing when you're having these conversations is you're just almost sanity checking. Have I understood what the business, kind of what business requirements, what the flow is, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas I think the when we've got normal kind of normal PR, then you kind of, I always end up feeling like I'm just doing static analysis of the code, which in many respects there are tools that do that much better than I do.
Yeah. Yeah, the first pass as a reviewer is just loading the context in your brain.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you're just making a lot of nitpicks. And then the second pass, you finally understand what it does. But then you're kind of giving up already because you've read this PR now for the last 30 minutes. Kind of, it's all right, and you already left 20 notes.
Yeah, well, I've got ADHD, which means that my concentration can be compromised even at the best of times. So when I'm looking at a load of text on a screen, I can very quickly lose the will.
Yeah. And so it being visual, it's just loading the context, understanding what the difference is much quicker. And so even on organizational, like going from idea to production, like idea to something on the canvas is quicker, and now canvas to production is also quicker.
It can be. I think that one of the main challenges that we've encountered with some of our devs is that it's creating flows is a very kind of different way of developing software compared to just writing out code in the as people are used to. And what I found is that people would write would kind of create a flow, and then they'd have like a function node which would have a load of functionality in it. Or they would try to kind of mimic a loop, so in a flow, which was like, it's not and this is not a criticism of the devs who are doing this. This is it just highlighted that there is very much a paradigm kind of shift in your mind you have to make when you're creating flows and thinking about, well, here's the message that's going to come in, what's going to be in the payload, what is going to go out when you're done with it. So, and it's all effectively, it's kind of all immutable stuff as well, because it's very much like functional programming.
Okay, yeah. Where the context and everything of the request is in the parameters that you pass a function.
Yeah, but you get all of that. The nice, like I say, the nice thing is that when you see it all visually, when you see it all kind of collated together, and I try and at the moment, the way we work is we kind of create a lot of subflows. I don't know if that's right, but we use the tabs to kind of go, this tab is doing this specific bit of functionality. This tab is going to do this bit of functionality. So, and then we kind of link all the stuff together so that you don't have like a one great big mammoth flow on one screen that even then would start to freak out.
Okay. Have you got? I suspect that when you are adopting FlowFuse, you already discussed the technical aspects, and it seemed like you were very capable in setting up the multiple FlowFuse servers, and then also scaling the pipelines beyond the FlowFuse pipelines. Were there other challenges you faced, either technical or non-technical?
Oh, I'll tell you what was, and this kind of actually relates to one of the questions that someone's asked in the Q&A, which I can kind of address now, because this was actually one of the challenges, which was how frequently are users updating the flows they create? How do you validate those flows behave as expected? So one of the things that we kind of realized is like, well, this is kind of like an end-to-end testing problem. So the first bit is, how frequently are users updating the flow? The answer to that is, well, at the moment we're a fairly small team, so they're updating flows fairly frequently, but independently of each other. So we don't kind of tend to have this thing where I'm working on one app and a flow as somebody else. But thanks to the newer versions of FlowFuse, with it having the kind of the little badges,
the real-time editing.
Yeah. That's been helpful so we know, oh, someone's there as well, and we can kind of then, you're back into the how do we collaborate. Then we talk about, well, what is it you're changing, etc., etc. With regards to validating the flows behave as expected, we've started to one of the things that I've tried and again, I'm not sure if this is something that I want to do going forward or not at the moment, because when we talk about end-to-end testing, when I'm developing the flow, I'm testing it as I'm going along, because I kind of see the behavior of everything in almost in real time. I make a change, I fire some data in, and out it comes. So, and I think a lot of people would say, oh, you need to automate it. And so I was like, okay, well, let's figure out how we might do that. And so there is a process using Circle CI now where that same snapshot is actually then is deployed into a Docker, Docker image of Node-RED, and then using Docker Compose creates all of the downstreams, and then uses I've forgotten the name of the thing now. Oh, that Playwright, that's it. My brain just went, no. So we used the Playwright to automate the tests, and that has actually worked. So it feels.
Can you explain a bit for the audience what Playwright is?
Oh, so Playwright is an automated end-to-end testing. It's not necessarily all end-to-end only, but it's a test framework that I think a lot of people use for testing websites, but it will also do APIs as well. So I create a load of test cases and then automate it and then kind of, fire it off kind of thing.
And compared to old school testing, this is more visual, right? So it uses a browser, if I'm correct, and then you can instruct it to click at certain locations or interact with an actual web page.
Yeah, you can do. I've not used that because the apps I've got tend to be like REST APIs.
Yeah.
So and I know there are GraphQL fans out there. I know there's other API styles are available. Not just REST. So I use it to call the APIs, and so I don't need to worry about, click this, click that. It's just, I'm going to send you this thing. What's the response? And then,
so you're black box testing Node-RED.
And then, I'm using things like WireMock to mock out downstream. So you've got that real control over what the inputs are and what the expected output should be. So and then in terms of the individual nodes, well, we treat each of the nodes effectively as like any other third-party software dependency. If it's, we're not going to test those things to the nth degree unless we create it. And when I did some work to update the pub sub nodes, which we want to release into the public domain at some point. But the process, there's a process I need to follow before I can do that. But that when I got the code, I added all the unit tests, and so everything was there. So I knew that this thing, these nodes that I've created are well tested. So I don't have to. So you just kind of, 'cause otherwise you can end up going down. Depending on how paranoid you are, you can end up. How far do you go? Where do you stop?
Got it. And so to go back slightly to the process and also the process, I think you meant to say like management has a certain process of publishing nodes. Were there other concerns with management of adopting low code, because it's somewhat of a paradigm shift? And for example, management, but also developers, did they get defensive, for example?
Well, yeah, there was definitely that kind of experience where I think a lot of people are used to, right? It's almost like that's my thing. I can control. I joked earlier saying I am not my code. And I always try and remember that I'm not my code. But I think there is an element of feeling like you're putting a bit of yourself into as you're writing this code. And I think, the whole kind of software craftsman idea, which I really like the whole idea. But I think as well, it also kind of suggests that, if I've crafted this piece of code, then, you should accept it as is, which is, we should be kind of pragmatic enough to say, well, it's not right for the use case, or so it's
and so the shift from writing letters in a black screen like terminal style to visual drag and dropping was for them a shift that
I think there's that shift of, well, I don't have control over what this code is, and I think there's another thing that some people kind of feel a little bit like this is too easy.
Okay.
It's almost like, no. This should be, software development. I've made a career over implying that software development is really, really hard. And this feels too easy. And I'm, it's like, if I can, if anyone can do this, then, where does it end? Where does it end? Cats writing code. So it's, there is resistance to it because of the, because of how much how much it can simplify things.
Got it. And that resistance, does it go away after? Like, are there certain triggers that make it go away, and what are those?
I think really the proof is in the in this case, the proof is in the actual deployment of apps into production and them working and not and doing what it is they need to do without any kind of
Yeah.
there was a lot about I remember there being a big load of conversations around, well, what's the observability here and all that kind of stuff, and having to spend time going, right, well, we can add Prometheus metrics into here. I mean, one of the things that that we needed that wasn't there originally was the logs weren't being outputted from the node, and um Ben that who works for you
Yeah.
was great. Big shout out to Ben, by the way, absolute legend. Um
Rightfully so. Yeah.
and yeah, he was able to create a release literally within like about 24 hours of me saying, oh, wouldn't it would be really handy if this was a thing. And next thing you know, there's a flag in there that you can change that means that all the logs now output into the terminal, so they get picked up and put
Yeah.
into
Your
the logging.
current log. Yeah.
So
And
I think
yeah.
so. Yeah. So once we've actually got stuff in there, I think it then becomes easier to kind of prove that it's good enough to be used in a production environment.
Yeah. So that convinces your peers. And how was that for management? Did management have questions about low code?
I think the management tended to be more open to the idea because the promise of fast feedback
Yeah.
and being able to kind of iterate quickly, that's quite a powerful one. I think in some so from I suppose from the product side of management, from the technology, the kind of the DevOps side of the management, again, reasonably open-minded, but with a lot of the caveats around, well, the observability, we need to know what's going on, and so on and so forth. So
Right.
yeah.
All right. We got a question just in chat about using LLM to write your function nodes. Have you tried it? And what was your...
Have I tried using so like ChatGPT and what have you?
Yeah, so with FlowFuse, you have the FlowFuse assistant that can write your function nodes, but
Yeah.
indeed you can also use ChatGPT or any other LLM.
Yeah. I was asking for a friend. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Robert. Tell your friend that I have tried using an LLM to write function nodes with varying levels of success, shall we say. I know that there was one thing that I was what was it, trying to do pagination in a REST interface, and pagination's one of those things where in my brain I know what it is, but I could never quite figure out the right algorithm to use. So I did once get Copilot to say, give me what does this meant to look like. So it spat out a load of code, and I looked at it and went, oh, okay, yeah, no, that isn't going to work. That isn't going to work. So I had to tweak it, but it helped me just suddenly remember what it was I was trying to do. I did ask it to create a code for like creating a custom node for something, but that was not so great.
Okay. So
I
you've
don't know what it's
tried,
like now.
but
That
you
was a
still
while ago.
need someone to check the code.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would never take an LLM on on
Yeah.
face value. I'd be like, okay, if it helps kind of get me gives me a bit of a head start, that's great, but I'm going to be looking at it and making sure that it's not about to do something silly.
Yeah.
Or is
Yeah.
just
Fair enough.
wrong, because they can be just wrong and they won't even realize that they're wrong.
Yeah. As last topic for today, I want to ask about open source. Previously, at the beginning, actually, you discussed that you've read the FlowFuse source code and of Node-RED as well. How important is open source for you and for Sky?
I think well, for me, I think it is very important, mainly because it's just that transparency really helps me. It's like in the case of FlowFuse, it helped me to understand a bit more what like your engineering philosophy was. So when it came to doing things like raising an issue about something, I was always kind of right. Well, I'm going to check this. Let me just check how this, where this might actually live, and where what the code. I wasn't going to write the code, but I was thinking like roughly
Yeah.
which area, and I start to look at it and this is where where I found about the kind of Kubernetes driver plugin kind of idea. So if it was closed source, I wouldn't have even I'd have just been sat there just kind of firing off GitHub issues, going please, 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 I need this to work for this
Yeah.
thing. But once I understood what kind of like what that philosophy was, it just helped me to frame the things that when I needed something, it helps just frame it better. You're not just kind of going, please, can I have access to
Yeah.
Kubernetes clusters, lol, and then send.
So you're able to understand the context and preload that in
Yeah.
and provide more context yourself in the issue.
Plus, if I can, if I can do something that helps to, I mean, this is I'd like to think this is the same for all developers. I don't want to kind of make but I think if you kind of get past a lot of the, the kind of past a lot of the flame wars on, tabs versus spaces and all that kind of stuff. I think, generally speaking, we want to kind of help each other out. We don't want to just kind of, there's a, I'd like to think that people are wanting to, maybe I'm being naive. Maybe I'm just young and naive, he says. But, I've done, like I say, I've done some work on on updating these GCP nodes, but it's all been done within the Sky context. And, I've spoken to my manager about it, and we want to release that back so that, it's a bit more up to date and all that kind of stuff, and has better error handling. But yeah, there's a process I've got to go through.
Okay, we'll sit tight. I'm
Good old
curious to find out.
bureaucracy.
All right, then there's one more fairly technical question in the Q&A.
Yep.
What strategy do you use for storing collected data? SQL databases? Do you have experience with DuckDB, CSVs, or Parquet files? And Parquet files, I'm just guessing that's the way you pronounce it.
I would have guessed that Parquet, like
Yeah.
Parquet flooring. A friend of mine actually did his own Parquet flooring in his house. Said it looked
Okay.
great, took him ages, and he hated every minute of it. Anyway, but that's kind of a side note. So no experience with DuckDB or CSV or Parquet files. I'm just going to put that straight out there. I've tended to go with using Postgres because it's because you've got the ability to query JSON data. So you've got the whole JSON-B thing. So it's kind of like this happy medium between, oh, I've got a SQL database, oh, but I've also got NoSQL as well. So the strategy as I kind of alluded to earlier on, was what's the simplest method I can get away with to begin with, and then if I can't get away with it, then I'll kind of go, all right, well now I'll try a NoSQL thing, or I'll try it all depends. And I know that's such a glib answer, but it's just a case of that. But then that's the thing about using Node-RED, was the speedy, as we said earlier, the speedy iteration. So if I can fail fast.
Why I still like CSVs. Like, dump it in a file somewhere, and the parsing and the writing is super simple. So yeah, if you have a spare 5 minutes tomorrow, you might want to check it out. Especially like setting up the PG. Now you need a new PG, you need a connection, you need to maintain that.
Yeah.
If it's just like 100,000 lines and they're relatively stable, CSV still does a very fine job. Especially if there's still like older legacy systems like FTP or something in play. Just plain old Unix files are, I think, still amazing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think there's still a tendency, I guess, and I know I'm guilty of this at times, to sometimes miss the simple it's like I can't see the wood for the trees. I'm always trying to. Well, it's got to be complicated. I'm still trying to
The
work that
correct
out in my
engineering
system.
solution, yeah, and it's scaled to 1,000,000 lines, yeah. Yeah, I get it. I've been down the same rabbit hole myself.
So I hope that answers your question, Carlo.
I hope so too. With that, I do want to wrap it up. I first of all want to thank you, Anthony. I had a lot of fun, enjoyed every minute of it.
And I apologize. I apologize for being so full of cold that I'm like, or if I was kind of heavy breathing down the microphone. I'm very sorry.
I do appreciate that you still came out today. It's great. Thanks to all the participants for joining us. Before everyone goes, I'd like to let you know that there's a quick survey at the end, and it will appear after you leave the webinar. Please take a moment to fill it out. We'd love your feedback to see if these sessions are like something we should repeat with different guests, for example. Once again, thanks everyone for joining us. We hope to see you in the future webinars. Thanks, Anthony, and have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.